While I raised Capra, I began writing letters to my father. Many of these, fortunately, he preserved. I must have sounded to him like a thriving young businessman. In a way, I was. I consulted him about planting a crop of annatto, as I had been advised to do by the agricultural director at Caving. I wrote, I have 500 acres of ground. I don't intend to plant such a large area with coconuts alone, but I don't want to go fooling around with any product that's likely to turn out a dud. So I was wondering if maybe you could have a chat with some scientific authority about this stuff called annatto. I carefully concealed from him the full nature of the latest brawl I was in. Imagine, I confided to him, I confided to him, the other day I was fined £10 for hitting a Chinaman who had poor manners and the presumption to call me by my surname without any Mr. or Master before it. I complained to him that the Chinamen around here were coolies and little advanced over the Kanakas. They were becoming increasingly insolent and getting away with it all because the League of Nations recognized them as equals with the white men. I reminded the professor how, when the Germans owned this region, a Chinaman had to take his hat off before talking to a white man. Otherwise, it was knocked off. High-handed arrogance. But in those days, that was the way things were in New Guinea. I never did tell him that what actually happened was that I went to jail. The district officer sat on the bench in the small caving courthouse, an austere room, with His Majesty's picture and appropriate Union Jack on the wall behind him, a dock, and rows of bamboo chairs. I had known the district office quite well, but in this situation I had little defense. The Chinese and I argued, and I got out of control. Whether it was for the reason I told my father or some other, I don't recall. In the ensuing fisticuffs, I fear the Chinese got the worst of it. I remember banging my head against a lamppost, and I made the most of this when I defended myself to the magistrate. He wasn't impressed. £30 or 2 weeks, he said. I'll take the 2 weeks. The district officer sat bolt upright. He folded his arms and snarled from the bench. But Errol, you can't do that. You know we've got no jail. The law said you couldn't put a white man in with the Kanakas, and the only jail they had there was for these poor natives. But there was a chap named Tom Prince who was in charge of prisoners. So I was placed in his hands, to stay in his house for 2 weeks under an honor system. His house having been declared a prison for my particular benefit. Tom and I, and some others, not prisoners, wound up playing poker each night. I maintained as good discipline as I could around Tom's house by avoiding his charming wife. Beyond that, I would make no sacrifices. I got out each evening, and finally my jailer wound up by pleading with me. Please, Errol, try to be home by midnight, will you? I couldn't afford to be chastened by a small run-in with the law. Life was too exacting, too uncertain, in this antediluvian part of the world. Man of the barricades, Flynn, old man, the good Lord gave you a fist so you could keep it clenched. Sims came to see how the plantation prospered. On this visit, he said, They've been shooting, and he pointed to the top of the coconut trees. I didn't know what he was talking about, but I denied it anyway. Look, he said, I know when they've been shooting. What he meant was that they were knocking off the green coconuts to get more copra, a bad practice. The idea in raising copra is to wait till the coconuts mature and drop, and not to knock them off before then. However, if you want to make it look good on paper, make it seem as though your monthly output is high, you have your men, with the aid of a long pole and a knife at the end of the pole, cut them down. After Sims spotted this, he was quite right about it. I felt that I was on my way out again. All I could do was raise hell with the boss boy. From then on, I began casting about for whatever means of livelihood I might next have to turn to. On an island about 12 hours away by sailboat, there lived two Australians who had also brought up an expropriated German plantation. They were trying to work this land and pay it off. One fellow, Dusty Miller, was a down-to-earth type who had conventional interests, manners, and some money. The other was an exact opposite. His name was Simpson, and his principal claim to fame was that he had been an actor of sorts in Dublin, and I had never met an actor. He had a wonderful vocabulary and a Shakespearean manner. I was much drawn to his phony and imperial style, and catered to it by calling him Simo, accent on the second syllable, which he liked. While I wondered if all actors were like him. From him, I picked up a sense of the dash that a man could carry off, but it was with Miller that I entered into a business deal. I learned of the availability of a new schooner just being built at Caving. A Chinese had begun the construction of her, but had died before the boat's completion. I had a little money. Dusty had a lot more. Couldn't we be partners? Freight copra from the small plantation islands to the big New Guinea centers? I told Dusty that by the time the boat was finished, I'd have enough money to meet my share. I went to Caving. My old friend Johnson was now Postmaster General of the city. Would he arrange for me to get a contract from the government permitting me to dynamite for fish? I used the pretext that my workers were under-eating, had berry. I needed to supplement their diet, and the waters around my way were filled with fish. If I could get enough fish, I could sell it to other plantations too, at maybe 3 or 4 pence, and pick up the money I needed to buy my share of the ship. I got the license. I returned to the plantation. I hadn't yet been fired, but I had my hooks into a new business now, in case I was, and I entered the strange new field of dynamiting fish for a living. You learned, you hoped, how not to blow off your arm, as some dynamiters did, by making the fuse of the dynamite plug too short. I had seen dynamiters with arms, heads, ears, knees, elbows blown off because they made the fuses too short and mistimed explosions. I gave myself the leeway of 4-inch fuses instead of 3. You lit the plug at the end of which there was a lighted dry coconut leaf. You let her fizz and tossed it at a school of fish. The plug went under the surface, exploded, and the fish came up, belly white. I had 6 neat canoes, each manned by 2 Kanakas, going for the fish, scooping them up as fast as I exploded plugs into the water. As soon as the fish surfaced, the canoes went for them, scooping them into the canoes. They were weighed. I sold them and got paid. The fish were plentiful, the business risky, but lucrative. I ran into a lot of shark trouble. One big son of a bitch always came around during the dynamiting. He and his tribe would show soon after the fuses blew, as if it were a signal that dinner was served. They hung around the fringes of the area where we dynamited, coming in from miles away. The Kanakas had no fear of them. All that they required of me was to be issued black socks for their feet and hands. The soles of their feet were white, and the sharks might go for something white, perhaps mistaking the hors d'oeuvre for the main course. So the socks provided my boys with some protection. They put the socks on their hands and on their feet, then they'd swim around, catch hold of the sharks, tickle them, jump on them, hang on to their tails, even whack them. The sharks behaved like a bunch of puppies with these fellows, though not the kind I cared to play with. But this big fellow, the boss shark, who came around snooping and led all the others, scooped up a lot of the small fish we killed. The big pig was costing me money. He wouldn't come close to the canoes, but he got to the fish before my boys could, and this was getting me very mad. I consulted with an expert fisherman, a young Japanese lad who also worked with dynamite. He showed me how to take a fish that was still alive, tie it to the dynamite plug with a longer fuse, and throw it out to the far edge where the big shark hung out. I prepared for mine enemy. Sure as hell, after we began the new day's blasting, this monster, about 16 feet long, came down the line, his fin jazzing over the water. I took one of these not yet dead fish and tied it in the way I was told and made the long fuse. I tossed it way over. He went in, scooped it up almost with a yawn and moved on, looking for more fish. I could see his passage in the water because the fuse was right in his belly and the smoke of the fuse was beginning to come out of his mouth. Once he made a quick spurt, as if he felt he had hot guts. Then he settled down, scooped up more fish. He made another spurt. Inside him now, the fuse was burning him. He was heading right under my boat. I could see the tail of smoke over the water coming right for my boat like a damn torpedo. This was completely unexpected. Underneath the boat, he turned around, began another spurt, and then the big son of a bitch exploded. He blew up, went to pieces right under my boat, and blew 2 planks out of it. We started to sink. All of his cousins and brothers, smelling blood, came immediately to the boat. They ate him fast, and there was nothing to be seen of him in 5 minutes. After that, when I dynamited for fish, I was the only shark to gobble up the profits. Maski is a very popular word in the Papuan language. It means I don't care, or I don't give a damn, to hell with it, or screw yourself, anything like that. When the finished ship came off the slips at the dockyard in Caving, I christened her by that name, the Maski. She floated down high out of the water like a breasty girl. Though Dusty and I shared ownership of the boat, we were mortgaged to the rudder to Burns Phillips Limited, a finance and general enterprise setup with offices in Caving and Rabaul and Sydney. From now on, I neglected the plantation. I let the boss boy run it. Whenever I returned, Mahaiti was there, faithfully waiting for me, convenient and available. But I knew one day soon I'd be leaving her. I plied the coastal waters between Matinalawa and Caving and looked for the copra shipping business, which we thought we'd get. But the painters were holding on to copra because the price was low, and we had to find some other way to make the ship pay off. Burns Phillips Limited agreed to help us charter passengers. They would act as agents and handle the money till the purchase was complete. They lined up some passengers to Rabaul. I hurried into Caving with the Maski and a small crew of Kanakas. Now, it was one thing to run the boat close to the coast, or about Caving Harbor, and allow the crew to do most of that. It was another to take an overseas trip. I was teaching myself navigation, but how do you steer from point to point on the sea? How do you steer at night from port to port? How do you keep off reefs, not even charted then? I ran for help to Basel. I said, Basel, I have a charter to go from Caving to Rabaul. I've got passengers. How the hell do I get there? He grinned. Flynn, dear boy, he said, you do the same thing as you did before, only this time you don't call the boss boy. You call the boatswain. You just say, Bossin, carry on. Can't you tell me how? Listen, I can't tell you how to navigate overnight. I've just lost my own boat, and I've got enough headaches. Call the bosun. He'll know. Just tell him. Very well. I'd try it. I knew almost nothing of navigation. nothing of how to be the master of a ship, but I had the license. I hired a crew. I was in business. A couple and their 3 babies were leaving caving for Rabaul. They signed as passengers on my ship. 1 baby was in a crib. The other 2 kids could dawdle about. I stood near the helm, a few feet away from the bosom. I looked outward at the deep water. I held up my arm, poised the palm of my hand seaward, like a knife, as a captain might, indicating the direction we ought to take. I bellowed, "Carry on, bosun!" The sails lifted, and the Mosky steered into the green-gray horizon, usually 10 days to Rabaul, under a master knowing little of boats or the sea. For 2 weeks we went off course, on course, zigzagging our way to Rabaul, with not too friendly winds. That wouldn't have been so bad, but my passengers soon discovered how green we were. The bosun, apparently, counted on me to be able to navigate, and he didn't know any more about overseas navigation than I. The woman denounced me loudly. The children bawled. The husbands stamped up and down on the deck, saying, "Wait till we get to Rabaul, I'll fix you." "Maybe we'll never get there," I suggested weakly. When we arrived, the male parent went straight to the port authority. He reported me as an incompetent, a menace on the high seas, more dangerous than any pirate. He was dead right. I survived the protest, and the biggest thing I learned from this was the idea that had been given to me by Basel Hoare, an approach I used all my days thereafter. When you want to get something done, hire a specialist, a foreman, a top man who knows his business, and say to him, "Boss boy, carry on." You may have a rough passage, but chances are you'll get somewhere. For several months, I ran the Mosky into local waters, carrying passengers, freight, and teaching myself navigation. My principal hangout in caving became the Burns Phillips offices, where I dealt mainly with a Mr. Exeter, my principal creditor. One day, when I walked into headquarters, I was introduced to an American named Joel Schwartz. He was a short man, perhaps hardly above my shoulders in height, but with an ebullient manner. He dressed in sporting khaki, with a white helmet. He had a manner of ease, of being well-heeled and well-traveled, and he was amiable. Schwartz said, "So you're the fellow I've heard so much about." "Really?" "Oh, just my way of speaking. I hear you're a schooner captain. You know this country, and you've got a good boat." "The Mosky gets me there." "That's just what I want it to do for me. Where do you want to go?" "Up the Sepik." "The Sepik? That's a long way from here, on the mainland." "I know, but I have to do it, and you're the man with the boat." He was pleasant, and I was flattered. Yet the last place in the world I wanted to go was the fearful Sepik River, a human graveyard.